Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual lecture series event, which is part of the Graduate Admissions Department here at Halmos College of Arts and Sciences. Thanks for being on time. My name is Farah Amro, and I am one of the graduate admission counselors at the Halmos College. And joining us as well from the Department of Conflict Resolution Studies is Dr. Joyce Avotri, our presenter for today's lecture. And from the graduate admissions team, Mrs. Megan Troy and Mr. Theodore Uy, who are both assistant directors of graduate admissions at Halmos College. I am the graduate admission counselor who is assigned for the Department of Conflict Resolution Studies, so I will be your primary contact for any questions you might have regarding admissions to our master's or doctoral programs in conflict analysis and resolution. However, any of my colleagues that you see now on your screen can help you and are happy to help you if for any reason you are unable to reach me. After Dr. Avotri's presentation, we will spend around 15 minutes answering any questions you might have. And to control the flow of the lecture and respect your precious time and Dr. Avotri's time, we're going to ask you to please write your questions as they come to your mind during the presentation in the chat box that you see down there where it says Q&A session. During that session, I will read your questions to Dr. Avotri to answer them. And any admission-related questions will be answered by either myself or any of my colleagues. A little bit of a background on Dr. Avotri. Dr. Avotri is an associate professor of sociology at the Department of Conflict Resolution Studies at the Halmos College of Arts and Sciences. Her research interests are in medical sociology, women's health, healthcare systems, international development, and globalization and health. Her research focus, however, is on the social construction and social production of health and illness among women in Ghana, where she investigates women's own views on the connection between their daily life experiences and their health in southern Ghana. These investigations resulted in key articles that got published in journals and led to a book contribution. In addition to all these academic achievements, Dr. Avotri collaborated with other professors on a project, also in Ghana, to research the nexus of spirituality, health needs, and healthcare access among the elderly in a small Ghanaian community. Dr. Avotri is currently authoring a book that puts together findings from her research on Ghanaian women's perception of their health. It is a pleasure to have Dr. Avotri with us today to discuss how sociology can be used to better understand health and illness in a society. Dr. Avotri, I am sure our attendees are as excited as I am to hear more about your research and experience in general. The spotlight is on you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to spend some time on talking about my project. I am in Department of Conflict Resolution Studies, but I teach sociology classes. My area of specialty is in medical sociology, which is a subdivision of sociology. And most often we use theories and perspectives in sociology to study health and illness. So we study many aspects of health and illness, looking at social conditions and their connection to illnesses and health. My research is generally on women's health in Ghana. I generally focus on women's health in Ghana, and I emphasize the lay perspectives of these women. So that means I allow women themselves to talk in my research, encouraging them to express their own views and perspectives. So I normally would research their problems, health problems, their concerns, how they understand those health problems as well. My research has also made me aware of the importance of mental health of women in my country, in Ghana. I focus also on their day-to-day activities and how it impacts their health. I've also looked at and actually published a paper on the impact of women's relationships on their health as well. Of course, I've also done some collaborative work with my colleagues. I usually will use field work and some element of participant observation in my work. That means that sometimes I travel to the field and I spend sometimes months or weeks living among the people I study, living and more or less participating in their day-to-day activities. Yeah, my research basically started when, or my focus on women's health started when I went to graduate school. And I went with the intention of studying women's reproductive health in African women's reproductive health, only to find out that there was so much literature on that. But there were other aspects of women's health that I was worried about. I had the impression that the literature tends to look at women more as just baby popping machines, just to put it in a very simple way. And I basically was arguing that in my own country, women were more than just baby producers. They were very active women who were engaged in income earning activities. Some of them were heads of households and others. So that generally changed my perspective when it came to looking at women's health. And so I started looking at the gaps in the literature on women's health. And over the years, they have been, the chances of the focus has become much broader. We now see, for example, World Health Organization encouraging research on women, taking into consideration the life course approach and many others. But the emphasis continues to be on women's reproductive health. Of course, it is because this is one of the very difficult or many areas that women struggle with a lot in the developing world, and of course in Ghana. So understandably, there's a lot of focus on reproductive health. But sometimes that, to me, stereotypes African women as just mothers. And in my argument, I say it may overlook some of the multiple contributions that women in Ghana and in Africa make to society. It may also not take into consideration the multiple and complex nature of their health problems. So we move on to the next one. And then I look at data collection among women as well. And I notice that the voices of the women that this literature is supposed to collect, the voices are absent. Most of the information is collected by professionals, doctors, NGOs, policymakers, and others, or hospital-reported cases. And the challenge with that is that it will not, or it doesn't necessarily capture all the views of women themselves, or the views of women themselves. And also, it may not even include problems that are not even reported to the hospital, because these women have many other sources of seeking care. These include religious healing centers, pharmacy shops, informal drug peddlers, itinerant, we call them itinerant medicine sellers, traditional healers, fetish priests and priestesses. The information that is being gathered does not necessarily take into consideration all these other sources of care. And so that data may not adequately be enough to show what sources of health problems these women have. So data collection is also a problem that I have with this approach. And the frameworks are usually biomedical and cultural behavioral. Biomedical is quite limited because it tends to focus more on individualistic explanations of health and illness. And in cultural behavioral, the focus is on lifestyles and the assumed voluntary decision to lead a particular lifestyle. But for example, there's this tendency for researchers to think that high fertility among women in Africa is because it's because of the traditional view of women, of children, that women value a lot of children, that's why they have a high fertility rate. Or lack of good nutrition is because they don't have good knowledge of nutrition. But it loses sight of the fact that sometimes choices are limited for these women. And so looking at issues from the biomedical tends to exclude the social context or the cultural context of some of these issues. Let's move on to the next slide. So there are many questions that remain, and these have been questions that I've been seeking answers to. What do women themselves say are their health problems? How do they understand and talk about health problems and illnesses that they experience? How do they cope or manage these challenges? What interventions or challenges or changes do they think or believe could help them improve their health? The next one. So my research has been going on in a small community in the southern part of Ghana. And the focus has always been on allowing women themselves the voice to speak to me. And so most often in my approach, what I do is I go in with open prompts, open-ended questions, and then I allow the women to talk. I tape record the conversations, come home, listen to them, sometimes go back to ask for clarifications, and then I document it, I transcribe them, and then try to make sense of that. Because to me, it's very important for lay perspectives of African women, for example, to be made clear to the general public or to academia. So let's go to the next slide. I'll talk briefly about the context that I use in understanding women's health. I tend to focus on social production and social construction of health, that the social structure within which women live is very critical in helping us understand the health problems that they experience on a day-to-day basis, their environment, their experiences, their relationships, and everything else. And it's very important for us to take gender into account because women's experiences are not necessarily the same as men. So it's very important for us to take into consideration the concept of gender. Apart from biological differences between men and women, women's experience life quite differently from men. Let me just give you a few examples or give a few examples. For example, in Africa, firewood collection for cooking is usually done by women, and it actually exposes them to malaria vectors and others. Water collection is usually done by women, and that also can expose them to waterborne diseases. When it comes to heavy loads, carrying of heavy loads and children, it's usually done by women. And then exposure to smoke and heat is usually the kind of work that women do in cooking, in the kitchen, in baking, and other forms. So when it comes to looking at women's health, gender becomes a very important concept in understanding women's health. It's important for us to take into consideration their reproduction, their reproductive activities, their reproductive contributions, relationship with others, and their own views about themselves as well. So this is the context in which I try to understand women's health. Next slide. So in 2018, 2017, I was fortunate to get a President's Faculty Research Development Grant. And so I was able to go back to Ghana to do some research. And it was field work, of course, in the same community. I did qualitative and at some level of quantitative research as well. I believe qualitative research provides that context to us understanding why women experience the kind of health problems they do. What I also do is to document women's own voices because using their own words, I believe, gives life to their own accounts. So I tape record these interviews, and then when I come back, I come to transcribe them. I usually would, in this case, I photographed my interviewees with their permission and voice recorded too with their permission. The interviews were conducted in Ebe, which was a local language that I speak, and then I translated them into, or transcribed them into English. The next slide. So I asked several questions, which were similar to the previous questions that I've been asking. What health problems they've experienced quite recently? How do they understand those health problems? And how what do they think can be done to improve upon their health situations? And these are some of the themes that have emerged. And of course, I cannot talk about all of them here, but I plan to talk a little bit about their physical health and mental health. So in general, they identify physical health as one of the major problems that they experience. When I tabulated their responses, aches and pains, I'll give a slide later on, was more or less number one on the list, the aches and pains in various parts of their bodies. And then in their understanding of those health problems, they attributed it to the daily grind of hard work, physical work. Their challenges as mothers, wives, traders, farmers. And one common theme that emerged from this was their discussions of motherhood. So what I ended up asking was, oh, what does it mean to be a woman? How would you describe your life as a woman? And then there was once, one lady said, hey, do you have enough time to listen to what it is to be a woman? Just sit down and let me tell you. So we've been having a long chat about what it is to be a woman. Another major theme, of course, is mental health, which was crucial to their well-being. So let's go to the next slide. Another theme that emerged from the research was women's resilience and challenges to coping. These women, there was one lady who actually said, I am the petrol in the truck. And if the petrol gets finished, where are they going to get that? And so she goes about telling me how indispensable their work is, their daily jobs every day, how they have to take painkillers and tonics, and sometimes a little bit of alcohol to be able to survive or to be able to go on with their day-to-day activities. Networking was also a very important source of support for them. These traders have networked with others to be able to buy food on credit, barter, somebody will bring in fish to get vegetables, just to be able to survive. So networking is very critical for these groups of people. And then, of course, the extended family and religion as well. Church membership was also very important. Next slide. And then, of course, when it came to suggestions for change, most of the suggestions women made were more structural in nature. So access to credit, jobs, healthcare, good affordable education. And so, for example, one of the respondents said, the thinking that we do is caused by money problems. If you have money, you can go to the hospital. If you are sick, you can buy medicine. You can take care of your child. You won't worry and think too much. It's this poverty, this money problem. You won't think too much anymore if you have money. So to them, structural changes would make a much more lasting change in their lives. Okay, the next slide. In the next slide, it's just a matter of me showing what I do in the field. So I go to the community, I sit with women. There's a tape recorder between the two of us here, and I jot down notes while the person converses with me. This is on a market day. I go anywhere that the women would like me to come to, and we can have interviews in many other places. This was my driver in the field who I contracted with him, and so he took me to various places for me to do my interviews. Today was one of those busy days, and I was in the market interviewing people who could speak with me. These two ladies are were some of my gatekeepers The one on the right was about 7-8 years old when I went in 1995 to do my first research on women's health. When I went back looking for her, I found her and she's not a mother, she's an adult. And I was able to interview her as well. The next slide. Briefly on the sample, the present sample, the average age is about 37. Most of them are married or are cohabiting.
Dr. Avotri, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think I lost you with the slides. You were talking about a couple of women. I'm trying to move between the slides to find them.
Okay, it's under in the field.
In the field.
Yes.
And is it the one that is before the My Driver or after?
After. Okay, let's move back. This is my driver.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, who was in the field with me and took me to where I wanted to go. And then this is on the road to one of the areas that I did an interview or did some interviews. Some of the roads were pretty bad, but my driver was good enough to take me to those places. This is also one of those days that was a busy day. We called some days market days, where people travel all over to come to a centralized place to trade. And so this was one of those days, and I was able to do a few interviews behind women's wares as well. Okay, and this was where I am now. You get it now?
Yeah, I'm with you now. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the lady on the left was one of my gatekeepers. I used what we call snowball sampling technique because that was the only way I could do this interview. So when I went to the field, I get into contact with people, and then the people will introduce me to other people to interview. But to make sure that I don't only interview friends or relatives, I usually will stop as an interview from somewhere and then move to another community and start another one. So that helps me to at least get different groups of people to interview. And just as I was saying, this lady was around 7 or 8 years old when I went to do my first research. So I went back looking for her because she spent a lot of time with me when I was doing research in the early 1990s, mid 1990s. So I went back and I found her. She's now a mother, she's an adult, and she ended up becoming one of the people I interviewed for this present research. Next slide. So for samples, this sample was much younger than the previous one. The marital status was similar. We can't get into marital status here because it's much more complex than just being married. Some of these groups of people have absentee husbands. Some of them are cohabiting, but they tell me they are married. And so it's much more complex than this, and we can't go into much details. Most of them are maybe middle school leavers, a few maybe senior secondary. I had two professional teachers in this particular sample. In terms of occupation, many of them or majority of them are traders, but they don't trade in just one item. They usually will trade or engage in multiple income activities at the same time. The average number of children they have is about three children in general. Household compositions range between 5 to 7, depending, but the average was about 5. Next slide. So I just want to talk briefly about some of the health problems that women told me specifically that they suffered from. And as you can see, in terms of importance, the first was bodily aches and pains, and then tiredness, general muscle weakness, headaches, stomach problems, fever, and then the list goes on. So those were the main health problems that they talked about. What was interesting was the fact that reproductive health problems was not at the top of the health problems that these women talked to me about. Next slide. So in talking about their health problems, it's very interesting the way they talk about it. For one, it's very difficult for them to talk about health problems independent of what they do. And then in many cases too, the health problems are multiple. It's not just one problem. It's a multiple sources of problems. So for example, in this physical health narrative, this interviewee says, "I'm always in pain. It feels like my back has been split open. Waist and thigh pain, they hurt so bad, I begin to sweat. I walk a little and I become very tired. I'll have to go lie down." And they are quite expressive and graphic about discussing or describing their health problems. One common theme that emerged from their understanding of why they suffer so much from health problems is this whole concept of womanhood. And they normally will use that other word that I've put there called tukara, that women's lives are full of tukara. So as a researcher, you want to understand exactly what they mean by that. And so these are some of the themes that emerge from their own discussions of womanhood and the hassles that come with womanhood. So they talk about their roles being indispensable. They use the word compulsory or by force, no choice. Their roles cannot be postponed. They have to be performed every day. They tend to contrast their roles with that of men. And of course, they would say that their roles are much more than the roles of men. And they would describe to me what their responsibilities are compared to that of their husbands or their partners. They talk about how life was difficult. And then many of them also say there are times of joy when a child may do something that will bring joy, or a family member will do something that brings joy. But in general, it's full of sacrifice, it's full of pain, it's full of suffering. But at the same time, they also talk about the resilience of womanhood, that for them, you must be strong. They are very strong. You can't give up. You must keep improving yourself. You must work hard. And then apart from that, you also need the strength to face abandonment in case you are abandoned by your partner, which some of them complain they have been abandoned by. So in terms of womanhood, they create this picture, now, I don't know whether to call it picture, of how difficult it is to be a woman. And the next slide also tells you about how they talk about it. So I have one or two quotes just to show how they talk about womanhood. They say women's lives, there's a lot of suffering in it, a lot of suffering in it. We suffer a lot. Household chores, childcare, the child will go to school, then you have to think about yourself, what to eat, what do you make, how do you make a living? It's hard. Lots of thinking. You think a lot. Even half of your head will start, they call it paining, hurting you. There's a lot of struggle and suffering in being a woman. And then they talk about responsibilities of women. Farming, that's the next slide. Farming, some of us have carried firewood which is used for cooking for so long, our head and our neck and our back continues to hurt all the time. You come back carrying these heavy load, then you have to go and collect water. Then you cook. You can't leave the bowls and wash. So you have to clean up. By the time you are done by the day, the whole body is hurting or aching. And then this is also a picture of some of the conditions under which these women work. These holes are used to process food. And one of the complaints some of these ladies gave me was the fact that there's too much smoke and heat that they have to deal with every day. So it's been hard work. Since childhood, we did a lot of hard work as children, carrying heavy loads, carrying firewood, carrying sacks of charcoal, falling into gutters while carrying those sacks. I know these are the causes. So basically what she's trying to say is these are the causes of their health problems, or what they call, in some cases, tukara. Next slide. Please let me know when I'm getting close to the end of my time. Okay. So they, of course, talk about trading, heavy loads, and others, which are all aspects of women's work. And those are some of the contexts in which they talked about their health. One other thing I wanted to talk about before the end of the lecture, which I'm seriously working on, is how these women talk about their mental health. Their expressions of distress, depression, not being happy, worried, sad, were consistent in their discussions of their own lives and their health challenges. And when I tabulated, the main reasons given were financial problems, problems with children, problems in relationships, and of course, their health problems and high cost of medicine. And the reason why this is so important is that these are enduring day-to-day issues in their lives. And research shows that issues that are enduring and stressful in people's lives on day-to-day basis tend to have much more negative impact on people's lives. And these women struggle with this every day. Next slide. So when you ask them about what mental health problems are, these are some of the things women will, or ways that they talk about other women's mental health problems, that they are messed up, they are confused, they are damaged, they behave in abnormal ways. Tying one tuber of yam honestly does not make any sense. Talking into the air, not the same. They don't dress properly. So these are the general ways that they talk about women who are struggling with mental health. When you ask them about their own challenges, they use certain interesting concepts or metaphor. One of them has to do with the heart. So they talk about having pain inside the heart, or my heart laments too much. My heart is not free. My heart feels tight. My heart is suffering, no freedom inside my heart. And I've been trying to find words that, let's say Western words, that probably will approximate this distress, anxiety, stress. I'm still working on them. And then other themes include the brain or the mind. So they use the word susu, which is the brain or the mind. So the mind is never free. It's the constant thinking. The brain is always overworking. So they use metaphors like that to explain how difficult it is, or how they have to keep thinking and worrying all the time. And these are other expressions they use: forgetfulness, being absent-minded, constantly worrying. Some of them would say they are lamenting inside their bodies. Sometimes they say they lose themselves or they feel helpless. Sometimes they say they are never happy. One of the women says, since she was born, she has never been, I knew she was a woman, she's never been happy. So there was that element of sadness, that element of depression. Difficulty sleeping has a whole section in my book, and we can't talk about that at this moment. Confused. Some people talk about having sometimes unusual behaviors, just like tying a tuber of yam, becoming confused, walking to places aimlessly and not sure why they even went to that particular place. So these were some of the expressions that women use to describe their mental status. And it's usually connected to their day-to-day life. For example, this is a mother talking about the challenges of mothering. Says, don't do this, don't do that. It's not easy. We mothers suffer a lot. You know, you don't have to remove your clothes and be walking about naked to be mad. Our children can make our lives bizarre, which is mess up our lives. Even what you experience at home every day can make you mad. So mothering, for example, was one of those challenges. This was also one woman who was actually evaluating her whole life as a woman. And she was in her mid 50s. And she was just more or less disappointed with her life. And she talks about how that has become a source of worry for her, making it difficult for her to sometimes sleep and make her very worried about life. And I don't know whether I have time to read through this. Do I have time?
We have till around 6:15, Dr. Avotri.
Okay, so I'm going to skip this. And so the sources of mental health is generally multiple in the case of these women. I'm going to go to the last slide, which is, these are some of the issues that I think are very important in my work. Lay perspectives are important and rich sources of information for policymakers and should not be ignored. And that women's physical health and mental health, at least in the community I'm studying, are critical to their overall well-being. Gender is an important determinant of women's well-being, and women's input is critical to the development and implementation of policies that affect them. So these are some of the issues that I argue for in my book. And of course, I always will thank the women that I interviewed in this project. Okay, so I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avotri. I appreciate it. This was a very interesting, valuable, and eye-opening presentation. We are gonna now take any questions that our audience might have. If you guys would like to ask anything, and if you haven't already written your question in the Q&A box, please go ahead and do it right now so we can read it to Dr. Avotri. You have a question, Dr. Avotri. I'm gonna read it to you. Dear Dr. Joyce Avotri, thank you for your insightful research presentation. Based on your findings, I am curious. How do Ghanaian societal attitudes impact the interplay between women's mental health, abandonment, and gender-based violence? Additionally, which community-based interventions have demonstrated effectiveness in addressing these interconnected issues?
That's a long question.
Yes, I'm gonna read the first part for you, which is, how do Ghanaian societal attitudes impact the interplay between women's mental health, abandonment, and gender-based violence? So how does their attitude affect their mental health, abandonment, gender-based violence?
Okay, I would say that mental health itself is a taboo topic in Ghana. And normally people talk about mental health as more of madness. And so to encourage, for me to have women talk about mental health, it's more about the lower psychosocial health of women, thinking too much, worrying too much, difficulty sleeping, not being happy. Those are the issues that women feel free to talk about. In terms of, can you come with the second? It's a loaded question, so let's break it down.
Which community-based interventions that you've probably done have demonstrated effectiveness in addressing these interconnected issues?
Well, I don't know whether they have any community-based interventions for mental health. I will be surprised if it's even been, I know World Health Organization is talking about mental health of women in the developing world, but I don't think they have gotten to that stage of having interventions for women. These women are in many ways supporting each other through family members, through their interactions with church. Church is a good source of intervention for most women in the community. The research I did, almost everybody is attached to a particular church. So I don't think there's a community intervention approach to dealing with mental health.
How about
at least with the community I studied?
I believe that maybe, Ronald was asking did you do any kind of intervention yourself as part of your research project? Did you offer these women any kind of solutions or services to address?
Yeah, I did not talk about that, but one of the conditions for going back to Ghana, or anytime we went to Ghana, was to show my appreciation or our appreciation for their time with us. There have been situations where I don't know whether it's appropriate to talk about the kind of help we give women privately. One area that I avoided a lot is giving advice on relationships. I don't think I was in that position to do that. But in terms of finances, in terms of help, in terms of transport from one place to the other, in terms of giving little monies here and there for businesses to begin, medication, buy medication, paying school fees. Those little ones, I don't feel comfortable talking about it. But in terms of community interventions, I have not done a community-wide intervention. Yeah.
Okay. Another question, Dr. Avotri, what made you passionate about this specific group?
I went to high school in this particular community and lived among them, did my national service in that community. And so I just felt this was a place I could go back to and do something, learn about them. There were little snippets here and there. These are a group of resilient, strong women, but they still have issues. And I was just interested in learning more about this community. And I've been working and going in and out of this community since after high school, I'll say since 1994. Yeah.
That's awesome. How can the stigma around mental health be broken for these Ghanaian women?
By talking about it openly. I call these lower psychosocial health problems because in some ways, these women, that's how they think about it, having difficulty sleeping, not being happy, and others. They try to distinguish that from somebody who is, excuse me to say, mad. In their point of view, if you are mad, that means you are not conscious of your environment and probably you go about absent-mindedly, and you are, in that case, required to go to a mental health facility. But in their case, they function every day, and so to them, they are not technically suffering from madness, but just having issues with thinking and worrying and stress, day-to-day life, putting you in situations where you experience stress, difficulty sleeping, not happy. That's how they see it. We, those who are listening, are much more worried about these health issues.
Dr. Avotri, since you've been working with these women for such a long time and you've lived among them as well, do you feel that their conditions have been getting better or getting worse? And their conditions as well, like their health, their mental health, do you feel that there's more interventions now or more options and services for them, or are things getting even worse and worse with time, with the years?
I will speak for before COVID. So, yeah. The challenges they face are still there, but some of the details have changed. For example, in some of the previous research, the emphasis was not so much on concern for education of their children, but that has become a big issue for most parents, educating their children, because they've realized that is the way out
Right.
of some of these situations.
Yeah.
They have more healthcare facilities now. They have more, many of them have tap water in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
In the previous research, many of them had to go and collect water from somewhere, but there are so many homes. Places of convenience is still a big problem for women. So sometimes they have to go into the bushes to do their business. So that is still a problem for them as well. So some things have changed. They have good roads to some places now. Construction is going on in other places. The place has become much more, will I use the word modernized? I don't know whether that's the correct word. So there have been changes throughout the years, all over the years. There are many more motorbikes. Instead of women walking, you see them carrying their load and sitting on the motorbike, moving from one place to the other. But still, many of them, if they have to go to the farm, have to walk and carry firewood from the farm and back home. Some of them are using kerosene stove to cook, but many are still using firewood to cook. So the changes are there. It's just that the change is slow. The changes are very slow in coming. Yeah.
A question from one of our attendees. They say social factors contribute a lot to women's mental health. However, stigmatization makes it difficult for such women to seek help in mental health facilities, as anyone diagnosed with mental health illness is considered mad. How do we change this narrative?
By talking about it, as I've said, by talking about it. And women would have to be part of that conversation. Encouraging women to be part of that conversation is critical in talking about it. But you know, even when we look at mental health, there's a tendency for us to think therapy and medication is the solution. These women's lives is what is causing their mental health status situation. So giving them, they do pop the medications already. They go to the drugstore, they buy the sleeping medication, they buy a little bit of alcohol. There's a chapter in my book which talks about how women combine these medications. They are already self-medicating. So it's short-term. So it's not just a matter of mental health, but their lives, the social conditions under which they live their lives every day contributes to that poor mental status. So it's not just a matter of popping medications or therapy. It has to go beyond that.
Dr. Avotri, I know a lot of our applicants, I mean, our applicants come from everywhere. They're international, and a lot of them come from this region. They come from Africa, and they're excited, and they want to, you know, be included in research that can help make a change in their environment. How do our programs help applicants who have this as their end goal reach this goal? What do you equip them with? Do you have options where they can go actually do field work with the faculty members? Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Well, you know, I teach at the undergraduate level. One of the two papers we wrote, which was focused on elderly people's access to healthcare in Ghana, we included one of our students in the analysis stage. We couldn't take her to Ghana, but we were able to include her at the analysis stage. So when we got the two publications out, her name was also part of the authors of the research. I must admit that my kind of research rarely attracts funding because I'm not a so-called scientist discovering something new. So it's very difficult for me to get the funding that I will need, and especially when it's in women who are not generally recognized in our society. It's very hard for me to get the funding to be able to maybe include other students in my research, especially at the undergraduate level, because I teach at the undergraduate level. I am hoping to get a sabbatical leave so that I can finish this book, because to me, it's still important for me to make this information accessible to more people to read, you know. So those are some of the challenges I think I face as an undergraduate professor.
Another question, or maybe a comment. An attendee is saying, "Great work, doctor. I'm wondering if your research allowed you to assess their attitudes towards their husbands, partners, and relative to their conditions." Your comments, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I will refer you to go and read one of my articles on women's relationships and its impact on their health. And I think it's in Gender and Society also. And that one I picked basically to look at how relationships with their partners, they said, impacted their health. So I have an article out there on that alone. And I will refer the person to go and read that. It's a little old, but the information is as current as it is right now.
Okay.
Yeah, relationships, yeah.
I believe these were our questions for today. As interesting as this presentation has been, Dr. Avotri, our time is running up, and you know, there's still 5 minutes. If someone wants to pop a question, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Avotri, for sharing this enlightening experience with us. Thank you, Megan and Theo, for you know, being part of this presentation as well. Our attendees, you're awesome. Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. We hope this hour was of benefit to you. For those of you who are interested in our graduate programs, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us at the graduate admissions team. Our general contact info, I am going to display it on the screen right now. We're eager to help you be an NSU Shark. Also follow us on any of these social media platforms, which we use to advertise our upcoming events. A final announcement regarding the open house for the Department of Conflict Resolution Studies. It will be held virtually on October the 17th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We strongly advise you to register and attend, because it is during this open house that we focus on covering all the admission requirements, and we answer any admission-specific questions that you might have. With this, I end our lecture for today. Thank you and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You have a great night, Dr. Avotri. Thank you so much.
Thank you.